Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
This tropical update is brought to you by Lowe's Home Improvement Warehouse. When it comes to home improvement, Lowe's knows.
Okay, it's time now to get the very latest on the tropics. Of course, this is the month of September, the 18th to be exact, and we are pretty much still in the peak of hurricane season across the Atlantic Basin. We haven't had much, though, you know that. We've had our last storm, but for the most part, nothing really developed with Erica as it moved off toward the east. Follow the exact track here of this arrow as it developed off the West African coast as a tropical wave and then really intensified as it moved west. But I'll tell you what, nothing really has been major across the Atlantic Basin, and we're in the most active parts supposedly of hurricane season. As throughout this year, the last 100 years anyway, we've had about 103 storms that have developed in these general areas. Now, each of these dots represents the origins, of course, of the tropical storms and or hurricanes over the last 100 years. So you notice that all of these areas are prime for tropical development this time of year. Let's see if anything is going on then as we look across the tropical Atlantic. We have been watching a tropical wave here as it moves across the central Atlantic, approaching the Caribbean. We'll get a little closer inspection on this system in just a moment. Another area of convection here in the western Caribbean, and we've been watching some thunderstorm activity over the Bahamas here associated with an upper level low. An old frontal boundary here has moved off the east coast, but notice this next strong surface cold front that will be swinging through. So with another trough coming off the east coast, we do not anticipate this system to develop into all that much. If it does develop into a system, it will be quickly pushed off toward the north and east. So nothing too threatening at the moment. The area that perhaps has a better chance of organizing will be this one, a large area of convection we've been watching in the western Caribbean. For now, we do have an upper level low just to the west of the main convection. We do think that this upper level low will start to move west, and that will allow a ridge of high pressure to build aloft. And when we talk about an anticyclonic flow aloft, that means an environment that is more favorable for tropical development. You can see that the convection has been persistent, but it has been very dispersed here and just not in a general concentric area. So it's very, very disorganized. It's just a tropical wave now, but as upper air winds become more favorable, this area will have to watch for you closely. For now, though, just thunderstorm activity west of Jamaica near the Cayman Islands here and the Yucatan Peninsula. The eastern Caribbean is quiet for now. We have been watching, of course, a few thunderstorms over the islands here, but nothing organized. And this is that next system that has been undergoing shear. That means very strong upper tropospheric winds. They've been basically blowing all of those higher cloud tops off to the north and east, so this system doesn't really have too much of a chance of organizing. And with that in mind, those prevailing upper air winds have been quite strong all the way to the West African coast. So even systems coming off the coast of Africa have been fairly benign and not too interesting, if you will, in terms of future development. Okay, that's a look at the Atlantic. Let's show you Hurricane Nora. It's been upgraded to a hurricane this morning with winds of 75 miles an hour. It's a minimal hurricane now, but is expected to rapidly intensify. As a matter of fact, it could become a Category 4 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Thus, hurricane watches have been issued right along the coast here of Mexico as the system churns the waters. It's been stationary, hasn't been moving much over the last 24 hours, but it's a very, very organized hurricane here, and the long-range forecast does take it off toward the northwest eventually as we go through time. We'll keep you posted on Hurricane Nora. Stay with us. The latest on WeatherScope is coming up next.
If it weren't for Lowe's Home Improvement Warehouse,
Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Good morning, everyone. About 10 minutes before the top of the hour. Top of the hour being noon Eastern Daylight Time. Marshall Cease here with Rick Griffin, and we're going to watch a tropical update now. We have a hurricane out there that we're going to talk about, and kind of in a similar location to what Linda was a little over a week ago. But that's in the Eastern Pacific, and you can just pick it out here. Is that majestic or what? This is just incredible. Much better if they don't affect any land areas, but boy, what nature does with these things. Nice ragged eye, better form than it was earlier. But in the east, out in the Atlantic, not a lot's going on. We've got a couple of waves that we're watching, but we've been in a shearing environment for the last several weeks. And by shearing, we mean strong westerly winds that shear off the tops of these thunderstorms that get developed over warm water. You know, the water's conducive to development out here, warmer than 80 degrees, for example. It's got to be warmer than 80 degrees to gain some momentum with these things. But the shearing environment blows the tops off, and they can't develop any circulation with them, and the convection dies off, and that's what's been going on out here. We'll get a little closer to it in just a minute, but out here in the Gulf of Mexico is a little change from yesterday. Yesterday, if you were watching, you would have seen a cyclonic rotation. That's counterclockwise rotation. And with that, it is very difficult for anything to develop under it. That's in the upper levels of the atmosphere. But now we're seeing what we call a anticyclonic bulge, which is more of a rotation clockwise, indicating high pressure perhaps building in the upper levels of the atmosphere. When that happens, it becomes conducive to outflow from developing thunderstorms below them that are over an area of water that's conducive to tropical storm formation. We have that kind of a situation in the Gulf of Honduras. So this is an area that's suspect that we're going to be watching over the next couple of days. And out here, east of Florida and north of the Bahamas, but including some of the Bahamas, we've had showers and thunderstorms that have persisted for days. And if this were to develop, and it's not likely to, it would probably be diverted to the east because of trough number 1 that'll be heading off the coast, and another one that's in Canada moving through the northern plains at this hour. Certainly by the weekend, hardly anything that would develop out here would have any chance at all of making it to the lower 48 states. Now here's the recent visible satellite picture. You can see the clouds we just talked about in the Bahamas, the Gulf of Honduras, and the convection just south of Cuba. And this is an area that has a broad area of low pressure at this hour. And with that low pressure and with building high pressure above in the upper levels of the atmosphere, possibility for slow development over time. So that's an area we will be watching. Out here are the Windward Islands and the Lesser Antilles, and we have a approaching wave that has been periodically scattering some showers and thunderstorms with it, but again, it's encountering some strong southerly and southwesterly winds at the upper levels of the atmosphere, and that's been shearing them apart. It is likely, though, that it will cause some showers for the weekend for the Lesser Antilles, but right now, it doesn't have a lot of chances for quick organization. Another wave moves off the coast of Africa. There's another one that'll bear watching, but it's going to move into an increasingly hostile environment due to the shearing. Here's our hurricane, Hurricane Nora. It's centered at 14.2 north and 103.5 west, 340 miles south of Manzanillo, Mexico. Winds at 85 miles per hour, and it is moving west-northwest at about 3, nearly stationary. Is this a majestic picture or what? Look at that. You can almost see, almost like three-dimension looking right down to the Pacific Ocean there. Well, it's meandering west-northwest. There's some ports closed we want to alert you to, as well as these hurricane watches. The port at Acapulco was closed to big ships, and so is the one at Lázaro Cárdenas, which is another port here along the Mexican coast. Looks like we are going to get some rain from the rain bands, and Nora is strengthening. So we'll keep you advised. You stay tuned to the Weather Channel. And here's the remnants of Linda. Linda still bringing moisture into central California. Rick?
Well, days of heavy rain. Last, we're beginning.
The Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
We went through the entire month of August, normally a busy month in tropics, without a single storm out there. We only had one in September, Erica, and apart from that, we didn't even have another tropical depression. And we've been telling you right along that we haven't seen anything out in the Atlantic that offers any kind of a threat. Now, we still can say no threat, but we are seeing one or two areas here where a little more interested in, let's say, than we were before. One is in the Western Caribbean Sea, where we've seen a little bit more concentration of clouds and showers, but it remains pretty disorganized. The upper flow, though, is becoming a little bit more favorable there. We had this low yesterday. It was in the southeast Gulf of Mexico, the upper low, and that's moved fairly rapidly down into the Bay of Campeche, and that's being replaced with a ridge here at upper levels. These winds depict the flow at about 40,000 feet or so. And although we don't see any organization, we see one or two things that interest a little bit along the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula at Belize, and down at Chetumal we have a northwest wind now, southeast around the Caymans. The pressures are not very high there, although we haven't seen any substantial fall in the last 24 hours. In addition to that, we have this one area out here in the Atlantic that's very persistent. We still insist that we don't think the upper winds are very favorable, but perhaps they're becoming a little bit less unfavorable. In any case, the disturbed area of weather there has persisted. Now, as we turn our attention to the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, you can see quite a few clouds here coming up from the south here in the Western Caribbean, but certainly we're not seeing anything in the satellite picture that we would suggest is any kind of organization there at all. Now, in the Caribbean Sea, the eastern part around Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and down here in the Lesser Antilles, from Antigua down to Guadeloupe, Barbados, it's just beautiful weather. A few clouds down here around Trinidad, maybe a shower or two, but not very much in the whole eastern Caribbean Sea. Now, the area that we've been looking at a little bit out here in the Atlantic, this is just about midway between Africa and the Lesser Antilles. And as you can see here, when we have the picture in motion, that the clouds and showers have increased during the day. Don't see a lot of organization there. And also looking at some of the upper winds out to the west of it here, we can see the tops of these clouds streaming off toward the east, suggesting to us that we still have a fairly substantial westerly wind there. So by and large, we would have to say not favorable, not quite as unfavorable perhaps as it was, say, 24 hours ago. Out farther east, nothing to be concerned about there either. We've had this little low pressure area south of 10 degrees that came off the coast of Africa about 2 days ago, and it's still moving off to the west without showing any signs of any organization, and we don't really expect it to show any. Well, quite a contrast here in what we have in the Pacific. We have Hurricane Nora. It was just elevated to a hurricane this morning, but it has increased during the day. Now the top winds are up to 105 miles an hour, and it seems well on its way to being another major hurricane out there. A major hurricane is one where the sustained winds are 115 miles an hour or higher on the Saffir-Simpson scale, and we expect to see this one increase even more over the next day or two. But the other thing to note about it is it's just about stationary. We've seen very little movement of this for the past 24 hours. We don't expect to see very much movement in the next 24 to 48 hours either. In fact, the official forecast 3 days from now has it still out here somewhere south of the Baja California, so that is a very slow movement. Now, the hurricane watch that was in effect along a portion of the coastline here has been discontinued, and that's been replaced by a flood warning, a coastal flood warning from Cabo Corrientes down to Punta Maldonado. Now, this flooding is due to abnormally high tides generated by the hurricane and high waves, not because of rain. So there is considerable beach erosion and that sort of thing there, so you need to watch out for that if you're going to be into that area. Now, here's a latest visible satellite picture, and you can see this very well-defined eye here. But if you look at the picture carefully, what you see is there has not been very much movement of the whole system. It has not moved much at all, and really not expected to. Well, in case you're wondering what happened to the remnants of Linda, somewhere out in this area here, you can still see a stream of upper level moisture headed toward California and beyond, all the way into Wyoming and even portions of Montana, not really producing much in the way of precipitation. Finally, David out here in the Pacific is just about to pass by Honshu, about 150 miles, we think, the nearest point on Japan, and then it'll move off toward the northeast. The top winds are 75 miles an hour. That's the tropics. Now back to Jim.
Thanks, John. Days of heavy rain have taken